Martin Popoff here, back again for another episode of the Contrarians. This is another solo show. It's on a little bit of an obscure band, but we want to do more of these obscure bands. I loved when Marco did the episode on The Move. He also did a solo show on Grand Funk, but he's promising to do a solo show on Groundhogs, which would be really cool. So in that spirit, I'm going to do a band with not a lot of records and not a huge band. So as you all know, the topic or the concept of this show is that one of the team basically has an album that he thinks is the best album by a band, or at least his favorite album by the band in his heart. Not just sort of thinking what the consensus view is, but an album by a band where it's not really the consensus choice of greatest album by this band. So today we're going to be talking about a new wave of British heavy metal band called Tygers of Pan Tang. You know them, you love them. They were one of the big bands of the new wave of British heavy metal. Obviously, the biggest bands were the likes of Saxon and Motorhead and Iron Maiden. I suppose that's the big trilogy. But this band debuted with a record called, here we go, Wildcat. This is my original English copy of this that I bought as a new release. One of the early new wave of British heavy metal albums. And then they followed that up with Spellbound, still early on in the new wave of British heavy metal. Then it was Crazy Nights with that great album art. And then The Cage, things got a little poppy at this point. After this, it was 3 years until they made the next album. We got The Wreckage in 1985, Burning in the Shade 1987. They eventually reformed, and they've been making records ever since. But it's it's not John Deverell singing, it's not Jess Cox singing, so it's quite a compromised lineup of a band, but they're still a cool band as well. But yeah, the big drama as part of this band is that the first album features singer Jess Cox. And then after that, they got John Deverell in. And the other cool thing about this band is John Sykes, the guitarist, known for moving on to Thin Lizzy and then moving on to Whitesnake, Blue Murder, solo albums as well. He came from Tygers of Pan Tang, so that's really cool as well. And the other thing about this band is that, I've often talked about, the spokes of a bike wheel with prog, and you can go off in all directions, and you can have, prog being progressive heavy metal. You can have jazz, fusion, folk, all over the place. Very keyboardy, not very keyboardy. Avant-garde, krautrock. Same with the new wave of British heavy metal. You can have new wave of British heavy metal going out from that spoke wheel into all sorts of different directions. Poppiness, death and thrash. Let's see what else. Progressive. But Tygers of Pan Tang, I've always argued, is one of these bands that's right at the hub of the wheel. They literally don't have terribly much eccentricity about them at all. They are, and I've often argued that even about the first Def Leppard album, On Through the Night. When Joe Elliott, says, "Oh, we were in the new wave of British heavy metal band," and that album is the most new wave of British heavy metal album you'll ever hear in your life. And I feel that about the Tygers of Pan Tang catalog as well, certainly across the first three albums. So there's a little history of the band. Like I say, they are continuing on, with newer lineups like a lot of these new wave of British heavy metal bands have done. So my contrarian choice for favorite Tygers album that I get a lot of heck for is this bad boy right here, Crazy Nights, their third album. There's my John Sykes autograph on that. What I like about this album, what people don't like about this album, and I agree to some extent, is that it's recorded very hot and distorted. The guitars are absolutely molten on it, but the drums have a little bit of sort of like a stiff 80s edge to it, even though we're still very early at this point. I mean, it is produced by Dennis McKay, which is kind of interesting. Dennis is known for Pink Floyd, Judas Priest, Hellbent for Leather, and I believe Queensryche The Warning, right? Yeah, it's kind of it's considered almost like a demo style recording, but I think it's perfectly fine, and it's very like I say, the guitars are super heavy on it. It's recorded hot and distorted, and what I like about that is that it gives it a personality all throughout the whole album, and I think the songs are really strong on it. It's essentially it gives it almost like a conceptual feel where the songs are a little less frantic and scurrying on than on Spellbound, a little less note dense, but I think they're big and stadium rocking, especially like Do It Good is your perfect example of kind of a stacked power chord song. Love Don't Stay is a really cool one. Running Out of Time, Raised on Rock. So some of these actually do have a little bit of a feel of the Spellbound feel, but I've just always liked it for its sort of moving ahead into moving a little away from the absolute rote early version of new wave of British heavy metal, and almost embracing that feel of when Whitesnake started getting less bluesy and more Kiss-like. To me, this is almost like their Kiss-like album, but it's still really heavy. And there you've got classic shot of John Deverell on the back and John Sykes on the back. So yeah, always have a lot of time for this record, but a lot of people do complain about it. They're not crazy about the sound on it. This version is your UK one, which came with the extra 12-inch single, 2-track single with Slip Away and the Stormlands previous unreleased on it. So that's my choice for favorite Tygers. I almost went. Also would be a contrarian choice. I almost went with this, but then I figured, there would be a revolt at the Palace. This album is very poppy, well put together, produced by Peter Collins of like kind of post-punk and new wave fame, but also later of Rush fame. Doesn't sound like Rush. It's not super electronic. It's just really well recorded. Just hard rock, stadium rock, almost to a hair metal level value. This album is like a great hair metal album that came too early. Literally, we're talking, what is this, 1982? Yeah. And great songs, really anthemic. Had a lot of time for this album. Was very surprised that I liked this because the fans absolutely revolted. It was so mellow compared to the previous album. But they're moving away. Like there were a lot of these new wave of British heavy metal bands that tried to move into that poppy realm with disastrous results. I think of Jaguar and Savage. Who else? Well, there were a whole band. There was Wrathchild, which was like the new wave of British heavy metal Motley Crue. There was Shy, Chrome Molly, these kinds of bands. But I thought this was a perfect blend of just good utilitarian, catchy songwriting with Danger in Paradise, Paris by Air, making tracks a little more atmospheric. The cover of Love Potion #9 is nice and heavy on here. Another good poppy one is You Always See What You Want to See. The Actor was kind of a mellow one on here. Rendezvous was a little bit of a hit for them. So John Deverell is still the singer on this one. So this episode is almost like, and I actually do believe this in my heart, but again, it's very contrarian to give you the double, the double fisted double whammy of my two favorite Tygers albums, believe it or not, are The Cage and Crazy Nights, right? And literally, so of the only four that would ever make anybody's list, put it that way, because nobody's going to pick anything later than that. I don't think there's any contrarianness, any contrarian on the planet that would go so far as to pick anything beyond these ones. So the sober choice that I find when I talk to buddies about Tygers for the greatest Tygers of Pan Tang album, the non-contrarian choice, the most non-contrarian choice is Spellbound. This is the first one with John Deverell. It's a great band shot on the back, looking all hairy. Cool looking guys, right? So this was a big change from the debut, which was, this one for the longest time was one of my favorite new wave of British heavy metal albums when it came out. There's the debut, Wildcat. But the big difference is this has Jess Cox singing on it. he was always a little bit kind of a bikerish, rough voice, a little bit of an Ace Frehley, a little bit pitch challenged or flat challenged. So this was almost like your naive bikerish garage version of Tigers, but some great songwriting on it as well. But I think most people were happy with the leap in professionalism to the Spellbound album. And again, on this you get essentially songs that are that sound like a band that's actually has a really good chance of making it. I mean, both, you know, Tigers were signed to MCA. MCA was that good label, EMI as well, but MCA was the label that was a major label that was participating in the new wave of British heavy metal really strongly. They had Fist as well. That awesome Quartz album, Stand Up and Fight, was on MCA. They had samplers, but this was a big step up. It's produced by Chris Tangerides, and it's not one of his best productions. I think his best productions were the Y&T albums around this time. I don't think Thunder and Lightning is produced all that well. But this is a little scrappy, and I never kind of liked that. It's a little bit bass challenged and even treble challenged. It's very tight within the range, and I don't particularly like the drum performance on this very much. Brian Big Dick, sticks, kicks, and a bag of tricks. I don't feel this album grooves very nicely. It's stiff. You know, Crazy Nights also is kind of stiff, but on here, I think it kind of hampers the situation because these riffs are very note dense. John Sykes does a lot of like cool riffing on here. But yeah, fans were essentially quite, happy with the raise in production levels and or just general professionalism when it comes to Spellbound. So I think Spellbound always wins by a little bit of a hair over, like I say, the debut, which was an amazing early new wave of British heavy metal album with the likes of Fire Clown and Euthanasia. Was a lot of these were singles, and they had non B-side singles. You can get a patch with them and stuff. Tigers put out a lot of singles. Slave to Freedom was a big one. Don't Touch Me There, Badger, Insanity. So when this came out, for a couple of years, probably for the entire new wave of British heavy metal, let's say 80, 81, 82, this would have always made one of my top 10 new wave of British heavy metal albums. But over time, it kind of slipped down a little bit, the same way the first Raven album slipped down a little bit for me, and maybe even the second one wiped out a little bit. Over time, I sort of liked less the absolute scrappy street level versions of these bands and liked the slightly more professionalism stadium rock version of the bands, and that's why this slipped a little bit for me. I always had it in for Spellbound. I'm not sure why. I never kind of thought it was as great as a lot of people thought, even though it seemed like it was a record of a band going places, right? And then, like I say, they kind of changed their sound all over again for Crazy Nights, and then changed it again. In fact, when you look at the Wreckage and Burning in the Shade and everything, this is a band that really made radical changes in their sound almost all the time, which is kind of interesting. I never really realized that. But yeah, so but any of the first four, I love to death. I think they're great. Yeah, I would say I'm giving you a double value contrarian view here with Crazy Nights and The Cage, which is nuts. So there you go. Hope you learned something about Tygers of Pan Tang. Go check these albums out. Pretty cool band. Comment below. Let us know what you think. Whether I'm crazy, as in Crazy Nights, or whether this makes sense. I would like to see the current 2021 poll essentially on which are the greatest ones, because I think there's arguments to be made for all four of these. We're adding exclusive Patreon content all the time, so check us out on Patreon. We appreciate the support. We're kind of trying to get this thing into something we could do more often, all the time, and having a little income from it kind of helps. That's it. Go listen to some Tigers. Go listen to some other new wave of British heavy metal, and we'll see you again next time.
That's it, dude.